Hello, this is Amir Kiabi with Harvey Cal's Real Estate, here to give you an update in terms of what went on in Toronto's residential real estate market for the month of January. There seems to be a shift in the sentiment of the market, which is consistent with my report for December. It seems that that trend did continue into January and activity did pick up even further. So let's see what happened. The first slide that I'm sharing with you is, as usual, the number of transactions that we had. So overall, comparing to January of 2023, we had an increase of 16% for transactions. It was mainly led by an increase in terms of number of transactions for condos, which was 22% comparing to last year. And we also had 6% more transactions for freehold properties, which is a consistent trend. In December, I think it was the first month besides the spring market of last year that we had significant movement in terms of activity especially for freehold properties, and the decline in terms of transactions for condos was only at 13%. We're getting used to getting like 20+% decline for number of transactions for condos. I think that momentum continued into January. Obviously, the notion that there could be the possibility of reducing interest rates later into 2024, that may have something to do with it. There is pent-up demand in terms of buyers deciding to sit on the sidelines, and perhaps we're seeing more of that being activated. So it remains to be seen how the spring market will play out. The next slide that I'm sharing with you is the number of new listings that came to the market. So we had 20% more condo listings entering the market in Toronto this year comparing to last year. We were basically at the same level as far as freehold properties that were offered in the market comparing to January of last year. It resulted in a sales to listings ratio of 47% for freehold properties, which is slightly higher than last year. And for condos, we were basically at the same level as far as sales to listings ratio is concerned. It is true that we had more transactions, but we also had more properties coming to the market. They kind of balanced each other out, and we ended up at the same sales to listings ratio. And this ratio is important because it gives us an idea in terms of the balance between the supply and demand, and the higher the number, the hotter the market. We also have to take into account the normal rate for that specific month. And so the next slide is showing you a number of freehold properties coming to the market on top, corresponding transactions at the bottom, going back 12 years in Toronto. 502 transactions on the freehold side is not necessarily a high number when you look at the historical norm, at least going back to 2013, but it is a change in the sentiment. I think that improvement in terms of activity could be the start of a change in the sentiment of the market. Next slide is showing you sales to listings ratios going back 12 years for the month of January in Toronto for freehold properties. We are getting closer to that trend line. We averaged just shy of 48% this year, as I mentioned. Moving on, the next slide is showing you the same concept, sales to listings ratio for condos for Toronto for the month of January going back 12 years. I don't think for condos we are out of the woods yet. 37% is still significantly below the trend line, at least for the past couple of years. So I would say there's still some room for improvement as far as balancing out the supply and demand of condos. This slide is showing you the number of properties coming to the market for condos versus the number of transactions. We had a significant increase comparing to last year, 970 versus 763 transactions, but it did also correspond proportionally with more properties coming to the market. Moving on, this slide is showing you average transaction amounts for condos and freehold properties. So for condos, we were up by 1%. For freehold properties, we were down by 1% compared to January of last year. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't think looking at average sale prices necessarily means anything. You have to look at the specific property type and the location, and then make an educated assessment in terms of price movement. And I would like to look at the index prices to form an opinion on price movement, because that's more universal. So the next slide will show you the MLS House Price Index for single family properties in Toronto. It is safe to say that comparing January of 2024 to January of last year, we're basically at the same level as far as index prices are concerned in Toronto. Now, each pocket could be a different story, but this is general, and based on historical norms, you could expect to see increasing index prices as we enter the spring market. Whether it would be as strong as the spring market of 2023, it remains to be seen. There are some economic data that are being released that are pointing towards perhaps a stronger than expected labor market, especially in US. I will cover that in detail in my economic update. But so far, I think the notion that we will start to see interest rate cuts into 2024, maybe that had an effect on activity. Also, we clearly had a backlog of buyers that decided to wait, and perhaps they're deciding to enter the market more aggressively now, but that remains to be seen how it would play out into the spring market. Next slide is showing us the same concept, index prices for apartments and townhouses in Toronto. I also wanted to cover how many days it took for a property in Toronto to be sold. So it took about 32% higher in terms of number of days for a property that would stay on the market to be sold, comparing to January of 2023. This slide is showing us the months of inventory. So I calculate them based on different segments of the market just to be more relevant. But overall, we could say Toronto, between freehold and condo residential properties, we had a decline. So we went from 4.5 months of inventory to 3.6 months of inventory. Lowest amount of inventory is as usual for semi-detached properties. And then this slide is showing you months of inventory across different property types, calculated first week of December, January, and February, just to give you a month-over-month sense. We've had a general decline of inventory in Toronto, going from 5.1 months of inventory to 4.5 and 3.6. Now, the numbers could be slightly different based on which segment you're looking at, but that is consistent with the sentiment change that there is more transactions happening, more of that inventory is being purchased. Lastly, I always cover what's been going on for rental prices in Toronto. So January, we had an increase for average rents. We were on a steady decline for 5-6 months as far as average rent prices are concerned, but in January, it picked up a little bit. For freehold properties, we averaged just shy of $3,400, and for condos, we averaged around $2,800 for average rental prices in Toronto. That's it for my update for January. I hope you find the information helpful. If you had any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Take care.